we are live. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all of you present here as well as the participants. Mr. J.P. Khaitan, Senior Advocate, let me welcome you to this program. And Mr. Pulok Saha, Chairman, ASSOCHAM Taxation and Compliance Sub-Council. Mr. Ramesh Patodi, Co-Chairman, ASSOCHAM Taxation and Compliance Council. Let me first thank you all for giving an opportunity to be a part of this program on taxation challenges and industry preparedness. The commissioner was supposed to join this program, but due to some urgent meeting with the CM, he could not, but he's going to depute someone from his department to be a part of this panel. I would like to say that this is the most apt moment when we are having this kind of program because so many changes are happening and so many things are coming up, and we have a very distinguished panel here to throw light on what's happening. Nationally and regionally, ASSOCHAM Taxation Council engages in matters of direct, indirect, and international taxes, and has always worked closely with the Finance Ministry and played a proactive role in the development of India's tax and trade policies. As an industry body led by industry leaders, the Council works to create a sustainable trade environment conducive to the growth of the industry in India, partnering with industry and government alike to advisory and consultancy process to bridge the gaps that exist between policy making, policy interpretation, and policy application. The whole pandemic situation has made government to release a lot of relaxation and clarifications. However, the clarity is further needed for managing the affairs by the companies and individuals. To evolve greater understanding and of the changing tax landscape, its impact, and possible approaches to deal with has encouraged us to put up this program today for our fellow industry members. On behalf of ASSOCHAM Eastern Region, I once again welcome you all to this virtual forum and request Mr. Pulok Shah to kindly take forward the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nandi. As Mr. Nandi told that this is a very apt program. Now, first of all, I would like to mention over here that the ASSOCHAM, this is the first time they thought it fit to create one separate council. That council is named that Taxation and Compliance Council. There was no such Taxation and Compliance Council separately because of the immense importance of the taxation and its compliance. It is becoming very, very critical for the stakeholders, and for that matter, the ASSOCHAM this time they thought it fit to have an independent council to be, that they can take it up the stakeholders' request, stakeholders' representation before the authorities and etc. So with this, and this is the maiden program of this after taking the charge of this year in this council. I'm the chairman and Ramesh Patodia is the vice chairman. And today, when we were actually about what would be the topics we should take it up. And then there was a lot of deliberations about this and what are the practical difficulties are being faced. And because of this COVID scenario, already people are already overstressed, and that due to the different law changes and compliances, etc., it is becoming more of a burden for the stakeholders and industry stakeholders. And with this, and then we thought it fit that we should have a program mostly into one from a direct tax point of view and some from an indirect GST perspective. From an indirect direct tax point of view, two issues which we have picked up, and that would be deliberated by our own Vice Chairman Ramesh Patodia ji. And the second most important point, which as all of you are aware, that there has been a decision which has been given by the Supreme Court suo moto about the extension of the limitation of time. And this extension has a very wide ramification. And for that matter, at present, we could not think other than Mr. J.P. Khaitan, a senior advocate in Calcutta, to deal with and to educate us that what is the wide ramification of this EN and what could be the possible impact of this order in favor of the SSE as well as against the SSE. So with this and thereafter that we had also from a GST perspective, we have invited our commissioner of the state GST, Mr. Khalid Anwar, and he had gracefully accepted our offer. But unfortunately, there has been an urgent call he got from our Chief Minister's office. He is still there, but he has deputed, he is the second man who is looking after the particular this audit aspects and etc. He would be speaking on this, but he also told me that given a chance that even if he gets a 5 minutes time, he will show his face. So with this now straightly, I request Mr. Ramesh Patodia to give his views about the two topics what we have decided today regarding. One is whether that due to COVID situation, what happened, as you all are aware that as per income tax law, the unabsorbed loss can be carried forward for 8 years. Now, there are cases for the last 2 years, there are companies who are not in a position even to earn a profit. So when they are not in a position, the unabsorbed losses are getting expired. Whether that could be a possible avenue for the chamber to make a representation before the central government in this regard, that whether that for this COVID scenario, there are so many benefits, so many allowance, that announced by the government, why this 8 years for this particular COVID scenario be extended to 8 years, 15 years. Second one important issue is that there are so many benevolent funds are being created by various companies to combat the COVID. And the issue which is coming up for this benevolent fund, that whether the donation also in a particular funds contribution, whether it is giving that benefit to the particular recipient, whether it would be taxable or not. These are the two most appropriate topics which we have decided to deliberate today. So, Ramesh Patodia, Mr. Patodia.
Mr. J.P. Khaitan, Senior Advocate, Mr. Ashish Nandi, all the members of ASSOCHAM, and other ladies and gentlemen. As Pulak Das gave brief introduction about the purpose of this seminar and the topics that we have chosen today, I think I can tell you that I have been speaking regularly. The topics that we are discussing today, in fact, I have not been able to find out any deliberation on these topics so far. And the kind of importance these topics have, one can imagine after we discuss these topics. And as rightly said by Pulakda, that ASSOCHAM on its platform should definitely make a representation to Honorable FM regarding the areas that we will be discussing today, friends. So first topic that I will touch upon in this webinar on taxation challenges and industry preparedness is regarding the carry forward of tax losses. Friends, as all of us know, Section 72 of the Income Tax Act deals with the carry forward and setup of business losses. And there is a time limit which is prescribed under the Act, which is 8 years as of now. And when I look back, I think that the time limit has always been there. In the 1922 Act also, there was a time limit of 6 years, which was later on revised to 8 years in the year 1957. So that time limit is continuing. And I think that we did not had any occasion till now, because COVID is one of a kind of a century kind of a situation, because the Spanish flu came in 1918 and now we are in 2021 facing a situation like 1918. So till now, there was no occasion to complain about this time limit thing generally. But now, as rightly said by Mr. Pulak Saha, that because of this COVID, the situation in which corporates have landed up, it needs some extraordinary kind of thinking. And when I see section 72 of the Income Tax Act, friends, I find a clue in the act itself. Because if you see section 72 of the act, it has a proviso which carves out an exception in the form of section 33B of the Income Tax Act. Section 33B, if I may touch upon, it was introduced in Income Tax Act in the year 1967 on to deal with those kind of cases where a business was disrupted on account of few things. I will read those words for the benefit of the participants, and I will leave the participants themselves to think that whether the situation is same which warranted the introduction of section 33B or not. Section 33B deals with what? It deals with business getting disrupted on account of flood, typhoon, hurricane, cyclone, earthquake, or other convulsion of nature. When I read this section 33B and the word convulsion, friends, I tried to find, frankly, I didn't know what is the meaning of convulsion. So what could I see? Convulsion means uthal puthal. So is it not uthal puthal that we are experiencing now, friends? Earthquake. I think West Bengal did had cyclone. Everything that you see in section 33B is in the COVID situation that we are facing now, friends. And section 33B has been put as an exception because in the Act section 72 itself, it is written that in those cases where the business got disrupted and the business has to be rehabilitated, then the time limit of 8 years will apply from the date when it is rehabilitated. So the lawmakers were mindful of this, I think, friends. But section 33B is no longer in the statute book because it has been taken out in the year 1985. But we are now back to the situation, friends. And so, is government doing anything in this regard? I think so. Because when I see the international community, India is a part of OECD. India is a OECD member country. And there was a meeting of OECD finance minister G20 group. There is a G20 group and the finance minister of G20, which included India. And so our Honorable FM had attended that meeting, I believe, on 7th of April 2021, when the Secretary General of OECD had presented a comprehensive report regarding the manner in which the COVID situation has to be dealt with by the member countries and what are the measures which has been taken by the various members of the OECD. And when I see the measures which has been taken in so far as these tax losses are concerned, I think you cannot leave any country. If you take the example of USA, the leader, I will say, USA had enacted an act called CARES Act. CARES Act was enacted, friends, whereby the tax losses which were earlier not allowed to be carried backward. Let me tell you, under the some of the OECD member countries legislation, there is a mechanism for allowing tax losses to be carried backward. So therefore, suppose if you have incurred loss in the year March 2021, you can set off these losses going backward in the earlier years. And you can revise your return and file your tax return, revised return, and claim refunds in that manner. That backward set off of losses is allowed by some of the member countries. When I see this in USA in the year 2017, this was withdrawn, but by the CARES Act, which has been introduced only recently, they have reintroduced this backward set off of losses, whereby the losses of 3 calendar years, that is 2018, 19, and 20, that can be carried backward 5 years and you can set off these losses in the earlier years, or you can even set off these losses forward. Carry forward also is allowed. You can plan your affairs the way it suits you. If carry backward suits you, that you are getting more tax refunds, you can carry backward. Carry forward also, you can plan. That flexibility is given under the US law. Similar is the law as far as UK also. They have changed the law in this regard. Even Singapore, European countries, even China has done it in a limited manner. What China has done, China has only taken out one sector. It's not a blanket kind of a situation. So therefore, friends, what I am trying to say is that the India, when part of a global community, OECD member, and when the other members have taken steps in this regard, I think it needs to be, India also needs a similar situation, friends, where the time limit needs to be revised in some form or other. One may argue that when share market is at all-time high, and we recently got the numbers of advance tax, that advance tax has, I think, jumped by 50% or 100%. So where is the argument for losses? But I think, friends, in my opinion, the share market cannot capture the data of all the corporates. It is only limited to the listed corporates that the data of share market can be relied upon. But insofar as the other big corporates, other SMEs who are not listed, other big corporates who are not listed, we do not have any access to the data of those corporates. It is only our finance ministry and the RBI and the others that they have the data, which will, I think, definitely reveal the kind of disruption that has taken place in the lives of these corporates. We should not forget the corporates like the hospitality sector. You see, the tourism and hospitality, the banking sector is stressed. There are services sector is stressed. So therefore, this definitely calls for some sort of changes in the manner of set off of the tax losses, either by relaxing the time limit to say more than 8 years, or allowing backward set off of losses. And the beauty of this would be, friends, that government doesn't have to give away money from its own pocket upfront, which they are doing. Honorable PM gave 20 lakh crore. So the tax losses, if they are allowed to be backward set off, then you can claim refund, though it will be indirectly coming out of coffers of government only. But this sort of mechanism is definitely needed, friends. And here I think 2 points I would touch upon before I move on to the next topic is one. If you see a report was presented by Dr. Bijay Kelkar, which was a report of the Task Force on Direct Taxes. They have rightly picked up one point, is that when you are allowing the carry forward of losses and to be set off in 8 years, you are not even giving the exact loss which I have suffered. Because suppose if the loss of year 2021 is allowed to be set off in 2029 after 8 years, then the net present value of the loss which I am getting set off will not be same. Maybe I'll get 10% of the actual cash outflow that was done in the year 2021 if it is allowed to be set off in 2029. So that kind of brainstorming was done in that report, friends, which I think is very good. And lastly, on this point, friends, if you see the provisions of section 115 JB of the Income Tax Act, which deals with the MAT taxation. MAT taxation is a tax on book profits, as all of us know. While computing the book profit, you are allowed to take deduct the the brought forward losses or depreciation, whichever is less. That is allowed to be deducted while computing the book profit. Therefore, and as all of us know, for the purpose of MAT computation, the set off of loss is not linked to section 72. It is the loss or depreciation as per the books of account, friends. So therefore, when there is no time limit for the purpose of calculation of MAT tax, putting a time limit here definitely requires to be reconsidered, I think. And our my Honorable Finance Minister, after having attended the meeting on 7th April, must have this into consideration. And I think this will be definitely done by those in sitting in North Block, friends. Now moving on to the next topic, which is the exemptions and deductions insofar as benevolent funds are concerned. You would have seen a lot of corporates have come forward, like the name which comes to my mind is Tata Steel, Mr. Ratan Tata. In social media, a lot of information is coming. Vedanta Group, even Steel, this JSW Steel, Reliance, all these big corporates have come forward and given help to their employees in some form or other. Tata Steel has gone on record saying that we will not, we will continue giving salary to an employee who has died to his family till the date of his retirement. And similar has been done by other corporates. They have given medical benefits, education benefits to the children of those employees who have died. So these are all being done, friends, by the corporates. Definitely, the corporates have reason to the situation and are doing it. But one thing which definitely comes into mind is whether when we are doing it, whether it should be out of the tax paid profits we are doing, or it is a tax deductible expenditure when we are doing. So here, friends, section 40 and 9 of the Income Tax Act is a disruptor, I will say, because section 40 and 9 deals with those cases where you are putting up money for the purpose of contributing to a fund or a trust or a society, and you are trying to build a corpus, and you are trying to claim deduction of an expenditure on account of that. So earlier that was allowed, but somehow later on, section 40 and 9 was enacted. And now if one contributes to a fund or a trust and tries to take deduction, then that is specifically barred under the law. It will not be eligible. But notwithstanding that, friends, there are decisions of Supreme Court. I have found two decisions, friends. There is one decision reported in 349 ITR Sandur Manganese Iron Ore, and there is another decision of Kenna Metal reported in 350 ITR, where Supreme Court has distinguished the provisions of section 40 and 9, I think, and they have said that contribution has to be distinguished from reimbursement. If it is contribution, that I agree that 40 and 9 may be applied. But if it is a reimbursement of an expenditure which has been incurred, then that cannot be brought within the ambit and scope of section 40 and 9. And it has been held to be allowable by Honorable Supreme Court in these two cases. And there is one more case of Gujarat High Court which I found, where 14 lakhs was contributed, and ultimately that amount was spent for the purposes of these benevolent activities. And it has, there also Justice K.S. Jaberi was there. It has been held to be allowable under section 37 of the Income Tax Act, friends, in those cases. So the in present, if you take into account the COVID situation where everybody is coming forward and helping the employees, I think it will definitely be a deductible expenditure if it is a part of expenditure which is done, but not as a part of corpus building exercise. Though all of us know that even central government has got a benevolent fund for its employees, and lot of corporates have, lot of institutions have, like chartered accountants have a chartered accountants benevolent fund, where the members are sometimes it is voluntary, sometimes it is mandatory. Say in central government's case, it encourages making contribution of 20 rupees per employee per annum to that fund, which is to be utilized for expenditures like this. So, but if it is simply a contribution without being followed by a matching amount of expenditure, it should not be. I think the 40 and 9 bar will still creep in. But if it is followed by an actual expenditure, then it should be deductible. And here one good point, friends, that notwithstanding the expenditure may be of a capital nature, but if it is ultimately going out of your pocket, say you are building a school for your children's, for the public at large, and even the employees of the corporates are allowed to study there. then notwithstanding that you are paid for constructing a building, that has been held to be allowable under section 37 of the Income Tax Act in such a situation. So this can be thought of. Otherwise, there can be structures like section 11 or section 8 kind of structure where the companies can set up a separate entity where even employees can contribute. Now, as far as the employees getting money and taxability in the hands of the employee is concerned, I think here if a salaried employee is getting any money, then the income, then section 17 of the Income Tax Act may be roped in, that it is being paid on a money, something which was payable by the employee. If the company is contributing, then it may be held to be taxable. But if the amount is contributed out of a, say, charitable venture, then it is specifically excluded from being taxed under section 56. As all of us know, if any money is received by a person from a charitable trust which is registered under section 11, then it is not taxable in the hands of the recipient. So based on the practical situation, these things can be planned in such a way by corporates that they ultimately, it is a tax efficient structure, and everybody, the company and the employee and the revenue, of course, is in a win-win situation. Let us see. I am hopeful. Mr. JP Khaitan will be discussing about the suo moto order which was passed by Honorable Supreme Court, and I think our Honorable Chief Justice Mr. Ramanna would do something suo moto in respect of these tax losses and allow the limitation period to be extended in those cases also, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patodia. Thank you very much for your wonderful deliberation. So now may I request Mr. JP Khaitan to start his deliberation.
My fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, the subject that we're going to discuss today is the effect of the orders of the Supreme Court in a proceeding which it started suo moto on the 23rd of March 2020. Now, these proceedings were brought to an end on 8th of March 2021, but they were again revived on 27th April 2021. So now to get into this, I think ideally we should be having a look at the different orders which were passed, and I have got them on a particular file here, so I will require to share them on the screen if that is if that is permitted. Right. This is the first order which was passed on 23rd March 2020. And let us look at how it started. The court has taken suo moto cognizance of the situation arising out of the challenge faced by the country on account of COVID-19 virus and resultant difficulties that may, now these are the important words, resultant difficulties that may be faced by litigants across the country in filing of their petitions, applications, suits, appeals, all other proceedings within the period of limitation prescribed under the general law of limitation or under special laws, both central and or state. So the court was concerned with difficulties faced by litigants in filing proceedings, which may be by way of petitions, applications, suits, etc. Within the period of limitation, whether it be the general law or the special law. To obviate such difficulties and to ensure that litigants do not have to come physically to file such proceedings in respective courts, tribunals across the country, including this court, it is hereby ordered that a period of limitation in all such proceedings, irrespective of the limitation prescribed under the general law or special laws, whether condonable or not, shall stand extended with effect from 15th March 2020 till further orders to be passed by this court in present proceeding. Then they pass this order under Article 142 read with 141. So that's for the binding part of it. So therefore the court said that the period of limitation in all such proceedings, whether condonable or not. Now this is important because the period of limitation, some statutes provide for condonation to an unlimited extent, and some statutes provide for limitation condonation to a limited extent, and some do not provide for any condonation at all. So basically the court was concerned with litigation to be commenced in whatever fora and which involved a period of limitation for the purpose of filing. Now there was an expansion of this. I will take you to the second order, which was passed on 6th of May. Now 6th of May, if we look at this, I will tell you, take you straight. It's a short order. By way of application, by way of filing this application for direction, the applicant has made the following prayer: to issue appropriate directions qua arbitration proceedings in relation to Section 29A of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act and initiation of proceedings under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act. In view of this court's earlier order dated 23rd March 2020, passed in suo motu writ petition, and taking into account consideration the effect of the coronavirus, etc., then I don't need to read that part again. It is hereby ordered that all periods of limitation prescribed under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act and under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act shall be extended with effect from 15th March 2020, and this order is being passed in May, till further orders to be passed by this court in the present proceedings. In case the limitation has expired after 15th March, then the period from 15th March till the date on which the lockdown is lifted in the jurisdictional area where the dispute lies or where the cause of action arises shall be extended for a period of 15 days after the lifting of lockdown. So therefore, this now 29A of the Arbitration Act prescribes the time within which the award should be made. Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act provides for those regarding those bounce checks. So the check has to be presented within a certain within the validity period. Then the demand notice has to be issued within 30 days of the bank informing that it has been returned. The person who has issued the check gets 15 days time to make the payment, and in case of non-payment, then one has to file the complaint within 1 month. So therefore, this is not exactly court proceedings. These were arbitration proceedings where the award had to be made. So it was not a limitation in the strict sense of the term of say filing any proceedings, but the court made this order. Now they explained this clarified this in a later order. I will take you to that one. That is the order of 10th July. Now, this is right. In suo motu writ petition number 3 by order dated 23rd March 2020 and 6th May 2020, both of which we have looked at, we ordered that all periods of limitation prescribed under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act shall be extended with effect from 15th March 2020 till further orders. Learned Attorney General has sought a minor modification in the aforesaid orders. Now this is important. Section 29A of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act does not prescribe a period of limitation, but fixes a time to do certain acts. That is, making an arbitral award within a prescribed time. Now, limitation, when the Supreme Court is talking of limitation, it is talking of limitation for the purpose of filing some proceeding by which some proceedings will get instituted. But 29A talks about the time within which the arbitrator has to make the award, and that award can be challenged in a court of law. So Therefore, they said it talks about it fixes the time to do certain acts, that is, make an arbitral award. We accordingly direct that the aforesaid orders shall also apply for extension of time limit for passing arbitral award under Section 29E. Similarly, Section 23(4) of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act provides for a time period of 6 months for the completion of statement of claim and defense. We accordingly direct that the aforesaid orders shall also apply for extension of time limit prescribed under Section 23(4). So they even extended it to the filing of the pleadings. And then they came to this Commercial Courts Act. Section 12 of the Commercial Courts Act, time is prescribed for completing process of compulsory pre-litigation, mediation and settlement. The said time is also liable to be extended. We accordingly direct that the said time shall stand extended from the time when the lockdown is lifted plus 45 days thereafter. That is to say that if the above period, the period of lockdown plus 45 days has expired, no further period shall be liable to be excluded. Now, this is the service of notices. We're not concerned with that today. Then let's go to the last part. Extension of validity of negotiable instruments. With reference to the prayer that the period of validity of a check be extended, we find that the said period has not been prescribed by any statute, but it is a period prescribed by the Reserve Bank of India, Section 35A of the Banking Regulation Act. We do not consider it appropriate to interfere with the period prescribed by the Reserve Bank of India, particularly since the entire banking system functions on the basis of period so prescribed. Reserve Bank of India may, in its discretion, alter such period as it thinks fit, order accordingly. So, where the when it came to nitty-gritties, whether the validity of a check should be extended or not, the validity period, the court refused to interfere. Now, this I will sort of bring this up later on. Now, let us see the order by which they disposed of this matter on 8th of March 2021. I would trouble you with reading this. It's again not a very long order, but because we must read the orders of the Supreme Court as a whole. We can't actually pick up a word and pick up the dictionary in the other hand and try to get the meaning of it, because this is not written as a statute. It is an order of the court in the background of a certain fact situation. Therefore, we need to bear in mind what is the factual background in which the matter has been considered. So here the Supreme Court says this is the order by which the suo motu petition was disposed of. Due to the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, this court took suo motu cognizance of the situation arising from difficulties that might be faced by litigants across the country in filing petitions, applications, suits, appeals, all other proceedings within the period of limitation prescribed under the general law of limitation or under any special laws. So I will please bear in mind the word litigants is repeated here. It was there in the first order. Then they talk about the period of limitation for filing different things. By an order 23rd March, this court extended the period of limitation prescribed under the general law, special laws, whether compoundable or not, with effect from 15th March 2020 till further orders. The order dated 23rd March 2020 was extended from time to time. That we have seen, those two orders. Though we have not seen the end of the pandemic, there is considerable improvement. Lockdown has been lifted. Then we need not go into this part. Then we are of the opinion that the order dated 23rd March has served its purpose, and in view of the changing scenario relating to the pandemic, the extension of limitation should come to an end. We have considered the suggestions of Learned Attorney General for India regarding the future course of action. We deem it appropriate to issue the following directions. In computing the period of limitation for any suit, appeal, application, or proceeding, the period from 15th March 2020 till 14th March 2021 shall stand excluded. Consequently, the balance period of limitation remaining as on 15th March, if any, shall become available with effect from 15th March 2021. So these are cases where the orders were received prior to 15 March, limitation had started, but by reason of the intervention of the order of the Supreme Court, it stopped. So they said, what is the balance period? The balance, the balance period will become available with effect from 15th March 2021. In cases where limitation would have expired during the period between 15th March 2020 till 14th March 21, notwithstanding the actual balance period of limitation remaining. So these would be orders which are received during this time. And the limitation would have run out because it's a fairly long time, or a year's time. All persons shall have a limitation period of 90 days from 15th March 2021. In the event the actual balance period of limitation remaining with effect from 15th March 2021 is greater than 90 days, a longer period shall apply. So if you have more time, even that is available. Then the period from 15th March 2020 to 14th March 2021 shall also stand excluded in computing the periods prescribed under sections 23(4) and 29A of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, section 12A of the Commercial Courts Act, and provisos B and C of section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act. Then the important words, and any other laws which prescribe periods of limitation for instituting proceedings, outer limits within which the court or tribunal can condone delay, and termination of proceedings. Now, it's really the scope and ambit of these words, this part of the order, that needs to be ascertained as to what is meant to be covered here. Because if we go back to 23rd March 2020, it spoke of filing, it spoke of litigants, it spoke of filing, different forms of the petitions or appeals or other proceeding, and it spoke of the period of limitation for the purpose of that filing. Then the expansion was made for the arbitration proceedings, for making of the award, for filing of pleadings, for the Negotiable Instruments Act, for the purpose of making a demand for payment, giving for the other party to the time making available the time to the other party to make the payment. And then so when time was extended there, so the stage of filing the complaint did not arrive. Then they extended it to the Commercial Courts Act. So these were the different proceedings to which it was specifically extended. But when it comes to the disposal of this matter, these words here, and any other laws which prescribe periods of limitation for instituting proceedings, outer limits within which the court or tribunal can condone delay, and termination of proceedings, these seem to have a very wide amplitude. And this is what I will show you the last order, and then we'll have a small discussion on this. I will close this and go to the last one. This is the 27th April 2021. I didn't read the portion where they disposed of the matter, but they did. Now, this is 27th April, and the court is right. This court took suo moto cognizance. This is the summary of why they passed the order on 23rd March. Thereafter, on 8th March, it was noticed the normalcy. The suo moto proceedings were thus disposed of, issuing the following direction, which I've already placed, so I don't need to get into that again. Then, now, this is the important. Supreme Court Advocate on Record Association has now, through this interlocutory application, highlighted the daily surge in COVID cases in Delhi and how difficult it has become for the advocates on record and the litigants to institute cases in Supreme Court and other courts in Delhi. Consequently, restoration of the order dated 23rd March 2020 has been prayed for. So we're going back to the 23rd March order. We have heard so-and-so, and the learned Attorney General and Solicitor General were also heard. We also take judicial notice of the fact that the steep rise in COVID-19 virus cases is not limited to Delhi alone, but it has engulfed the entire nation. The extraordinary situation caused by the sudden and second outburst of COVID-19 virus thus requires extraordinary measures. Now, the important words, to minimize the hardship of litigant public in all the states. Hardship to the litigant public. We therefore restored the order dated 23rd March 2020. So they restored that. And in continuation of the order dated 8 March 2021, direct that the period of limitation is prescribed under any general or special laws in respect of all judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings, whether condonable or not, shall stand extended till further orders. Now, when they speak of this order in continuation, first they restored the order 23rd March, and then in continuation of the order 8th March, there is a extension of limitation in respect of all judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings, whether condonable or not. Here again, the use of the words whether condonable or not takes us to a situation where something needs to be filed, and there can be a condonation in the delayed filing of that. I will come back to this a little later. Let me show you the rest of the order. It is further clarified that the period from 14th March till further orders shall also stand excluded in computing the periods prescribed under Section 23(4) and 29A of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, Section 12 of the Commercial Courts Act, Proviso B and C of Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, and any other laws which prescribe periods of limitation for instituting proceedings, outer limits within which the court or tribunal can condone delay in termination of proceedings. Now, these are the same words which were there in the order of 8th March 2021. Now, the question is, we must also remember certain other facts. The first order of the Supreme Court was passed on 23rd March 2020. The taxation and other laws, relaxation of certain provisions ordinance came on 31st March 2020. Various dates were extended. There are many things which were extended. 6th May 2020, when the Supreme Court took up the matter, it only spoke of the Arbitration and Conciliation and the Negotiable Instruments Act. 10th July, again, the Arbitration Conciliation Act, Commercial Courts Act, check validity did not go into. Then on 29th September 2020, the ordinance got replaced by the Act. And like the ordinance, notifications were issued under the Act, extending the time. The ordinance and the Act had granted specific extensions for income tax and for the previous indirect taxes of customs, excise, service tax. For GST, a separate section was introduced, 168A, for issuing notifications for granting extension. So all that was happening. The notification was issued. The fourth Supreme Court orders on 8th March 2021. Here again, now this is where they, for the first time, they said any other laws which prescribe period of limitation for instituting proceedings, outer limits within which court or tribunal can condone delay in termination of proceedings. Then 27th April 2021, there's again a notification for under the Relaxation Act for the income tax purposes. And on the same day, the Supreme Court passed this particular order. Now, the question that I have been asking myself, what was the Supreme Court really trying to deal with here? Was it trying to take over take over is the wrong word. Was it really trying to get into the arena of administration of the tax laws of this country? Because there's so many things which are required to be done under the tax laws. Like one has to file a return. There's a period prescribed for that. The officer has to issue a notice. There's a period for that. So did the Supreme Court really mean to say that all these different prescriptions made by the different taxation statutes, they were all to be subject to what these particular orders that have been passed? To my mind, and these orders do not reflect that all these developments, the ordinance, the notifications, then the act which was issued, notifications thereafter, that any of these were placed before or considered by the Supreme Court. So I have come to a particular view, and this was not so long ago, maybe about half an hour ago, after much thinking, that the Supreme Court was not really dealing with how the law is to be administered, the taxation law is to be administered. The Supreme Court was really dealing with adversarial litigation, where there are two parties involved. It can be the government also on the other side, and which proceedings envisage filing of pleadings to institute the proceedings. The time is there to complete the pleadings. The time is there to decide the matter. So those are the adversarial litigation is what is actually the court also concerned with, and those are the things which travel up to the courts. So the court was not dealing with a simple say the basic assessment, the basic compliance of the taxation laws by the assessee. It was not dealing with the basic duties of the officers who are to say issue a show cause notice within a certain time. So those are duties to be performed by the officer, and for that, see, we need to bear in mind that the who needed the helping hand of the court here. It was the litigants, the people who administer the act. They have access to the law, to the making of the law itself. And that is how the ordinance was made. That is how the act was made. The notifications were issued. So they are not people who need the helping hand. They have everything at their command. So to my mind, the Supreme Court did not intend, nor do these orders so read, to get into the nitty-gritties of the working out of each and every taxation statute. For that, the Parliament has come into the picture. For that, the subordinate legislation by way of notification has been issued. So I would think that these orders should not be read as applying to this initial stage of say compliances by the assessee or the assessments by the officers, or say reopening of cases, because at that stage the proceedings are not adversarial. Those are there. It is the settled position that there is no adversary at the assessment stage. That starts only from the appellate stage. So this is how I have kind of rationalized it. Otherwise, one has to read the order as a whole and get a consistent meaning out of this. I found it rather difficult to comprehend that the Supreme Court really meant to intervene in each and every aspect of the administration of the taxation law. I don't think so, because that was not how the matter was dealt with. So I would just sum up my view to say that these orders apply to adversarial proceedings and not to any proceedings before that stage, where the matters are between the assessee and the particular officer, or whether, say, for the return filing, say the assessment, all that is not subject matter of the orders of the court. This is what I have come to, but it seems to me to be the most reasonable way to look at things.
Thank you, Mr. Khaitan. It is really, you have clarified the whole thing. As I told you the other day when we were discussing this issue, it has become a really concern for the assessee that whether this order to be adversely impacting the SSE, because whether the department would, for every aspect like issuance of notices, getting the assessment completed, etc., all these, whether that Supreme Court actually given the power to the department for administration of the tax. So that you have rightly clarified, and you have really given us a big relief to this year. Thank you once again. Thank you very much for your wonderful deliberation. Now, as I told you in the early session, that Mr. Khalid Anbar, who was supposed to join us because of the extreme emergency, he could not attend us. He could not join with us. So he has given this his task to his deputy, Mr. N.C. Guria, who is an additional commissioner of the state GST. I know him personally, one of the most brilliant officers I have come across in the department. So today, basically from a GST perspective, actually, as all of you are aware, that the department is in a process of starting the GST audit. GST has started from 1st of July 2017, and we are almost completing 4 years of time. And by this time, the audit should have been started, but because of the last almost 1.5 years, because of this pandemic, it got delayed. And the department is completely ready with this. So we would expect, that what is in the mind of the department, because as you all know, that whenever any departmental audit comes, so people are really scared that, oh my God, the departmental audit people have come up, then they will give us a big demand and all these things. That mindset of people, the industry stakeholders, they are actually fearing. So and that is why I just wanted to hear from Mr. Guria, what is exactly the feeling of the stakeholder, whether that feeling is correct or that otherwise it is incorrect, and really you want to work as a partner with the stakeholders. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Guria. Now over to you. Thank you, Mr. Khaitan. So you can also stay with us if your time permits.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. CFO Lok Saha. Thanks to ASSOCHAM also for organizing this webinar on various crucial topics on both the direct tax and indirect tax in India. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. My gratitude to my previous speaker, Mr. J.P. Khaitan, for his valuable inputs in these important topics. This session is supposed to take with our respected Commissioner, Mr. Khalid Anwar, but unfortunately, it is not possible to attend just now. But he will try his level best so that he can attend within this time period. However, I just want to convey some message in respect of this departmental audit in GST. Please, if you allow to share my screen, it will be better for me. Hello. Yes, thank you. Yes, audit in GST. Actually, I have given a small subtitle that a new arena in compliance verification. Rather better to say a new arena to improve the compliance of the taxpayer. In this session, basically, I want to focus, as Mr. Saha requested, that the fear which is there in the mind of the auditors, how in this upcoming audit process, the state authority is going to audit the taxpayers, so that there should not be such fear that there will be a very abstract demand, which the audit taxpayer have faced in earlier regime, that is in VAT regime. In VAT, there was some basic difference in VAT audit and also with the audit of the Central Tax Authority, that is in excise and service tax. I will, there will be the brief difference. I will try to give that difference also. So my presentation plan is like this, that what is the different types of audit that was prevailing in pre-GST regime, and what is the basic difference with that with the GST audit. And this provision of section 65, it's very short provision and it's very short rule of 101. There will be a audit flow chart that will be from selection to completion. What is the process that will be adopted in West Bengal by the tax authorities, particularly for the taxpayer who are under the state jurisdiction only. And that is applicable to the taxpayer in West Bengal only. And I will discuss a brief procedure of selection procedure, then what is the examination, how the books of accounts will be produced, and what are the books of accounts we are really expecting from the auditee, and how the communication will be made to the auditee, and what is the consequence of the final audit report. That is my brief plan of presentation today. Now, first, you know that there is basically three types of audit. One is turnover-based audit, that is basically done by the chartered accountant and the cost accountant when there is a exceed of a particular threshold limit, that is as per subsection 5 of section 35. And there is another audit also, you definitely aware of this, that is special audit. It is basically, this audit is a special circumstances when during the course of any scrutiny, verification, even in the process of audit, any tax official faced any complication in a particular case of examination. In that case, that officer can approach before the commissioner to appoint a specialized team, any audit firm or a cost accountant, so that complicated scrutiny or examination can be completed. So today we are not discussing about this turnover-based audit or special audit. We will focus on audit by the tax authorities. That is on section 65 of the CGST or the SGST Act, read with rule 101. So basically, there is under the Finance Act, the audit was conducted on the selected taxpayer only. And they actually published, they are used to publish that there is a details, guidelines and procedure, which is there in SESTAM, that is Central Excise and Service Tax Audit Manual. And that in case of non-compliance with the final audit report, the audit report was supposed to refer to the jurisdictional commissioner for initiating demand and recovery proceeding. That was the practice in under the Finance Act for the audit of service tax and central excise auditors. Under VAT Act, it was a little bit different, that that is basically for the sales of for the sales part, that is the VAT Act is concerned on the seller of goods only. So in that case, after the audit, assessment was compulsory. That was the practice in VAT. But if the audit is completed and after that, that is referred to the assessment authority for assessment, that was a repetition of the same work. Therefore, from 1st April 2012, there is a change in the law that why not this audit report will be automatically changed into the assessment order, so that there should not be any repetition of the same one. So that was a great help to the auditees in VAT regime. But unfortunately in GST also, again, we are coming back to the same procedure that first the audit will be completed on the selected taxpayers. After that, if there is no compliance from the part of the auditees in respect of the final audit report communicated to the taxpayer, then again that will be referred to the demand and recovery officer. That is to initiate the demand and recovery proceeding as they are in section 73 or 74. In this point of view, I want to convey one message to you that we have already published our audit manual for our officers, for our audit officer, and categorically it is mentioned over there that this audit is not any investigation. it is basically to cooperate the taxpayers in the question of audit. Why this audit? Because there is a frequent change in the law and procedures and rules during these first 3 years. So therefore, I know that most of the taxpayers, they are puzzled to cope with this modification, amendments, etc. So therefore, this should not be our motto, that to grill the taxpayer regarding this any non-compliance and to take that non-compliance seriously as a to take it as a that mistake has been done in a fraudulent intent. So our motto is that no, please help the taxpayers to identify the areas where there is a mistake and how that mistake can be sought out, and that should be specifically in a very collaborative mode, because in this case, that if the taxpayers help us, then we'll be in position to convey all such messages, because this is a very pandemic period. It is not possible to come with books of accounts before the desk of the audit officer, and it is not possible all the time to go in the premises of the auditee. So we will prefer that all communication should be done through the e-platform, and GSTN is providing the platform for initiating and communication of all the documents. But in all cases, it is not possible to submit all the documents or statements through this online process. In that case, the audit officer will ask for documents, and the auditee also can voluntarily produce to that document before the desk as asked in that notice. But the difference what was there in VAT regime, which most of the auditee or some of the auditee faced, and which was a common grievance of the auditee, that in spite of production of all the books of accounts, the order has been passed almost as the ex parte order with a huge demand. So in that case, in GST audit, particularly in our audit manual, in the plan, I will show you that it has been formulated in such a way that the higher authority always will be with the audit team, so that there should not be any unnecessary demand, which is basically bogus paper demand, and which is definitely hazardous and burden for the taxpayer. That should not be there in GST audit. So as a part come to the selection, that that a commissioner is empowered under the Act to select any auditee for any taxpayer for audit. That should be the registered taxpayer, and at least 15 days time will be given after issuing or ADT 01, and the commencement will be the first date when the auditee will produce the books of accounts at the desk of the audit officer, or the institution of audit takes place at the place of business of the auditee. So it is very important that the auditee should cooperate to the audit team, so that in the first day he can produce all the books of accounts, but not all the books of accounts, because it is the experience that sorry, asking all the books of accounts in one go, it is very difficult for the auditee also, and also for the audit officer to examine all the documents. So we advise in our audit manual that audit officers should ask the auditee that much of document which is required for that audit. So it should be a very planned audit, so that we should not ask unnecessarily the voluminous documents and books of accounts to auditee, which is the audit team is unable to examine all that things. Now, the important thing is that after the commencement, only 3 months period is there to complete the audit. That is the crucial point. So I request to all the eminent participants over here, that please convey and prepare to your clients, so that they can mind this time limit of 3 months, which was there 1 year in VAT regime. So this 3 months, within these 3 months, the audit should be completed. So basically, all the auditee, they will be 3 to 5 or 6 days to complete the audit. Sorry, I am rectifying myself. That 3 to 5 times that is the occasion to produce his books of accounts. Because if the volume is high, he may be 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times adjournment may be allowed. But in the when the volume is not so high, in that case, it is better to complete the audit within this 3 adjournment or 4 adjournment, whatever may be suitable for the auditee and the audit officers. But unlike that VAT regime, that should not be extended up to the 1 year, though the power has been given to the commissioner that beyond these 3 months time, the commissioner can extend another 6 months. But you know, this is not desirable because in this GST audit, there is no declaration form, because most of the time in VAT regime, the auditee, they request for time for the production of declaration form basically. But in GST, there is no declaration form. And the books of accounts is also ready in their place of business as per the provisions of the Act. So therefore, I think so much time will not be taken to complete the audit. And this audit is not like any assessment that everything will be examined and it will be a report of total examination of the books of accounts. Basically, we will try to focus on the area where compliance is less. And that will be done basically on the documents already submitted by the dealer in the portal. That is their return in form of 3B, 9, 9C and 1, 2A, whatever they are available in the portal. We will, before the audit, we are preparing the analysis on that submission data. On the basis of the data, we will identify the risk area, and on the basis of the risk area, there will be an audit plan which will be placed before the higher authority. And if the higher authority is satisfied, yes, that audit plan is correct for the particular auditee, then the audit team will commence the audit by issuing that ADT 01. Now, this is the flow chart that is, you know, the first is the selection. So the commissioner will select, then the RTP will be allocated to the jurisdictional audit officer, then the audit plan. This is the new concept that was not there in VAT audit. Why this is in GST audit, in West Bengal GST audit by the state authority? Because you know, there is a previous experience that in audit notice, all various types of books of accounts was mentioned, and that was asked by the audit officer to his auditee. So in that case, it may be pertinent to mention that all of these documents are not required at all to verify to complete this audit. In that case, for example, suppose some auditee is selected for the risk parameter of his exempted supplies more compared to his say taxable supply. So in that case, the audit officer, one audit officer, he may ask that please come all of its exempted supply related documents, statements, payments, etc. And another audit officer may ask that you just submit a statement of your exempted supply related documents and the statement related to exempted supply and relevant HSN code or SSC codes and the description of goods and services which are exempted. But before asking all these documents, it is pertinent to mention that the audit officer should himself ask himself that why he is asking all such documents to the auditee. Rather, he will check that is there any tendency of abrupt increase of this exempted supply in a particular period, or there was there is no abnormal trend in that claiming of this exempted supply. In that case, if there is no abrupt rise or decrease or you know, for that claim of ITC related to that exempted supply, that is the reversal of ITC is not proportional to that. In that case, he can ask for auditee to for all this required document. Otherwise, if there is no abrupt increase or there is a reversal of ITC as per the law, then why unnecessarily will ask the auditee to for all these documents? So that will be checked by the higher authority when he is sanctioning this audit plan. So in VAT audit, the audit officer was supreme. What he wants to examine, what kind of documents he wants to examine, what kind of books of accounts he wants to. He asked the auditee, that was final. But here the audit plan should be placed before the higher authority, and he will ask the audit team that why he is asking all such documents to the auditee. If he can answer with his justification, then that audit plan will be passed. After that audit plan is passed, that examination will be started. And in case of examination also, I will show you how in a staggered manner the books of accounts will be asked. Next, that in case of observation, in every stage, the observation will be communicated to the auditee in writing and also in e-platform, so that there should be transparency in this communication. And also that submission is also requested from the part of auditee to the platform, so that in both the end, the transparency should be there. Now, after communication, this observation, the auditee will be allowed sufficient time to give his answer. And if he feels that some of the audit query is acceptable, and then it is our request that please accept that audit plan, audit queries, and you please deposit the amount if it is applicable. And if you don't want to agree that audit queries, or if you can partly disagree that audit queries, in that case, please submit your reply to the audit team or the audit officer. Then after considering your reply, again, a draft final audit report will be placed before the higher authority to check that, yes, there is no such abnormal demand, no such paper demand, or any injustice to the auditee. That is basically the audit flow chart in case of audit in GST by the state authorities in West Bengal. Now, I'm coming to the next slide, that what is the procedure of this audit selection? Now, audit selection will be done on the basis of various risk parameters. Basically, the risk parameter means the potential risk parameters are the turnover-based tax, the ITC, refund, sector analysis, and non-compliance analysis on non-compliances. For example, risk areas are such as entry-level risk parameter. Which are those entry-level risk parameter? I already explained that turnover, tax, ITC, refund, evasion from goods and services. That should be different types of entity-level parameters. Then the risk associated with compliance behavior, like that if you're late filer of return, in all the return, there is a marking for each parameter. Basically, the marking varies from 1 to 5. If all the returns are submitted in due time, then your marks is 1. If you submitted all the returns in late, in that case, your marking will be 5. In case of non-submission of return, the marking is there, and for all 3B1 and GSTR 996. So that is the example of marking. Now there is risk based on various ratios. Suppose the turnover ratio to exempted ratio. If the ratio, taxable turnover to exempted ratio is the highest, so in that case the marking will be 1. When the taxable turnover to exempted ratio is say minimum, so in that case the marking will be maximum, that is 5. Just a minute, please hold on. Sorry. So am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
You are
yes,
audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. So that is the example of how the marking will be there in case of selection procedure. Now there is another risk parameter, one type of that is risk based on exceptional report. Exceptional report means, you know, there is a difference of ITC claimed in GSTR 3B versus ITC auto populated in GSTR 2A, turnover declared in 3B versus GSTR 1. So all these parameters will be considered as the to calculate the final risk score for selection of audit, and also risk based on pre-GST history, that excess ITC in the last return under VAT Act versus a GST credit claimed in Tran 1 and 2, potential evader in pre-GST regime, and such other criteria which the audit selection committee will deem to be fit, consider deemed to be fit. So these are the basics of the risk parameter, how the taxpayer will be selected for audit. Now, for selection committee formed by the commissioner, they already identified various risk parameters for audit for the period of 2017 and 18. Weightage of each parameter, that is normally 1 to 5, but that may be vary depending upon its importance. And you know, if it is found that the claim of ITC from a fraudulent taxpayer and cancelled taxpayer, in that case, that who purchased more from the maximum from the cancelled dealer or a non-existent taxpayer, in that case, that marking may be 10, and who purchased minimum from that marking may be 1. So that the weightage may vary. Though it is the standard weightage 1 to 5, but that may be vary from 1 to 10 also, depending upon the gravity of that offense. So based on all the parameters, a final score will be calculated for selection. The taxpayer pools will be divided into 3 segments, you know, that is higher turnover group, medium turnover group, and the lesser, that is the small turnover group. And it is desired by the commissioner that from the small taxpayer up to a certain turnover limit, that should be excluded from selection from audit, though some of them may be selected on random basis. And you know, 10% of the selection of the taxpayer may be done on the random basis. That is the suggestion of our commissioners. And in case of production of books of accounts, you know, that it was our experience that already I discussed that asking all the books of accounts and records from auditee on the very first day, it is basically causes inconvenience for both the auditee and the audit officer. Therefore, the audit RTP should keep all its books of accounts ready to be made available, but produce only a staggered manner, only those which may be asked by the audit officer time to time in the process. Which are the documents may be asked by the audit officer? That is on the first day. That is, you know, annual report and director's report, and profit and loss and balance sheet, trial balance if the RTP has multiple GSTN, and consolidated party-wise statement of inward and outward supply. That is a consolidated statement of party-wise inward and outward supplies. Reconciliation statement in respect of your turnover and claim of ITC if there is any difference with your return that is in 3B and 1 or 2A and 3B. That may be asked in the first day of hearing. So on the basis of that, some limited area will be fixed where you further you are needed to produce the further books of accounts. So these are the basic 5 documents. I repeating this, that may be annual report or director's report, profit and loss account and balance sheet, trial balance only in case of that if the business is there in other state. But if the RTP already submitted 9 and 9C, this trial balance is also not required. And you know, there is a consolidated party-wise statement of inward and outward supplies. It is always asked in VAT regime also, and that it should be there in GST also. And you please submit yourself reconciliation statement in respect of turnover and ITC. So these are the basic documents they may be asked, and with that document, one questionnaire may be sent to the auditee. But this questionnaire will be great helpful to complete the audit in a very planned manner and in a very focused manner. What is that questionnaire? That is a very simple questionnaire. I'm giving some examples. Say, what are the series of invoices you issued during this audit period. If you issued more than one series, then please mention the series and from which number to which number you have issued. And if there is any discontinuation, that is any repetition, by number or cancellation of invoice, you mention those numbers only. And please prepare supporting documents so that you can prepare all the supporting explanation and document, and that for these reasons that invoices are cancelled, for the reason there is omission, etc. So these are some example, one example of that questionnaire that will help the audit team and the auditee to focus on the process in a planned manner. So now, in case of examination of audit, you know, if you go to the definition of the audit in GST means detailed examination of record, returns and other documents to verify the correctness of, what is those correctness? Turnover, tax paid, refund claim, ITC availed, and the last portion is crucial, assessment of compliance with the provisions of the Act or the rules made thereunder. That audit officer may ask whether you have complied with all the provisions of the Act. But is it possible for any audit officer or for any auditee to explain that with supporting document and statement that yes, I have complied with all the provisions of the Act? So basically, from the definition, there may be fear in the mind of the auditee that the audit team may ask all such documents and all such records to justify the auditee's claim, auditee's submission, audited compliance in respect of all of the provisions of the GST Act. But the fact is not like that. Which are the area where the audit officer may focus? That is I am giving. One, you know, that is that one area is, the first area is books of accounts and your invoice. In the books of accounts area, mainly the audit officer will focus on the invoice, because you know invoice not only the crucial document for the auditee, that is also very crucial document for the person who are claiming ITC on basis of on the strength of that document. So please, in respect of the issuance of invoices and related time and place of supply and your valuation of supply, but in all the cases the valuation should not be asked. If you apply Rule 28 when you are supplying goods to your distinct person, in that case, if you apply the 28, the audit officer may ask whether the valuation rule has been applied properly or not. For instance, I am giving one instance that when some say bank, he is supplying some vehicles purchased centrally in Mumbai to different branches. So in that case, the valuation rule, the second proviso of the valuation rule, the whatever may be the value declared in the invoice will be treated as the open market value of that goods. That is not applicable. That rule is not applicable, because you know in case of these cars, the small cars, to be used in different branches, the branch is not entitled to claim on ITC on that part. So when someone is applying the second proviso of Rule 28, be cautious that whether the recipient is eligible to claim full tax credit on that invoice or not, and that is for further supply. In that case only that valuation rule of 28 may be applied. So some of the area where the audit officer may ask for the valuation rule, whether the rule has been applied properly or not. I am giving another example in case of pure agent, that when someone is treating himself as the pure agent in case of any supply of goods or services, whether he is satisfying he can satisfy with all the agreements that yes, he is the pure agent. He has no intention on the rights of that goods or services, and he is not basically holding any titles of that goods and services. All these parameters which are there to satisfy with that pure agent. So it is not that every invoice will be checked whether the value has been given properly or not. Only the specific area where there may be any negligence, maybe not deliberate, that may be a mistakes, that this is not taken care of properly. So the duty of the audit officer is that to identify that area and to give the opportunity to the auditee to rectify himself, so that in future he can rectify, and that mistake will not be a repeated mistake over there. Now that there may be RCM related, there are several changes during this 17-18. So for first few months there was RCM when there is a purchase from unregistered taxpayer above 5,000 per day, more than 5,000 per day. And after that, 13, I think, I don't remember the actual date. After a certain date, that was not there in the, from 13th of September 2017, there was no reverse charge under 9.4 or 5.4 of the CGST or IGST Act. But reverse charge is there in 9.3 particularly. 9.3, in case of 9.3, that is subsection 3 of 9 or subsection 3 of section 5 of IGST Act, the reverse charge is very much there. But some taxpayer, they when they saw this, that notification regarding this reverse charge of this subsection 4 of 9.4, that there will be no reverse charge from 13 September 2017, they asked us, sir, ये तो बहुत अच्छा हो गया, इसमें और कोई रिवर्स चार्ज नहीं है, बहुत अच्छा हुआ. तो हम लोग उन लोग को बताया उस टाइम में, जो नो, देयर इज नो रिवर्स चार्ज अंडर सबसेक्शन 4 of section 9 or subsection 4 of section 5, but there is very much reverse charge in case of, that is the enlisted goods and service, that is applicable under subsection 3 of section 9 or subsection 3 of section 5. So please check yourself whether there is any less compliance or non-compliance in the part of RCM or not. And last is, if there is any clarification of circular in respect of your particular trade, please verify that. And if there is any, advance ruling or advance ruling of appellate authority, order of the appellate authority on advance ruling, please verify whether you are obeying that or not. If you are not obeying, in that case, please prepare your supporting argument and document only. There may be a legal fight that your officer may ask that why you are not following this advance ruling, and there may be certain reason that you are not, why you are not following that. But if it is applicable to yourself, if you have applied for the advance ruling and that is not in favor of you, in that case, that should be, that either you have to apply for the before the appellate authority, or you have to file the appeal before the higher court to justify your claim. So these are the particular area where the compliance with the provisions of the act and rules made thereunder or not, that will be assessed. It is not the thing that the act will be assessed whether you have complied with all the provisions of the act and all the provisions of the rule or not. That is not the fact. Your officer may ask that area where if there is a lack of compliance, the revenue may flow to the other state. The revenue may come to the government in a later date, that if you not comply with the time of supply properly. And it is our intention to identify those areas, because from the first year it is very difficult with the rapid changes of the law. So the audit officer will assist you to identify those areas so that you can rectify yourself in the further course of your action. Now, I'm giving one example that in case of, maintenance of books of accounts, there may be a apparent, fight with accounting standard and GST. Because, for example, in case of your supply to the distinct person. Yes. Okay. Sure. So I'll please allow me 5 minutes time. I'll just 2 or 3 slides are there. So basically, in case of, there may be a fight of these books of accounts as per the accounting standard and vis-a-vis GST. In that case, you please prepare your reply and prepare your books of accounts and your statement such a way that can be placed before the audit officer. And for example, say contractor received mobilization advance of 50 lakhs in 2017-18. But that since it is a mobilization advance, and that will be the part of your GST revenue on that very date. But the RA bill is issued, in the next financial year. So in that case, when the RA bill is issued, or as per Accounting Standard 7 or Indian Accounting Standard 11, when the accession takes place, that will be your part of revenue in the books. But as for the GST perspective, the revenue will be in the year of 2017-18. So the books of accounts, for to justify this, you have to produce before your audit officer that for the year 17-18, this 50 lakhs revenue will be there in your liability ledger. So you have to produce that liability ledger, and that synopsis of the liability ledger, yes, that was there in your liability ledger. So that is one example, and that is, other income is very important area for the audit officer. In that case, please prepare your recovery from employees, transport charges, mobile expenses, notice fee, etc., etc. Different types of income like profit on sale of asset, reimbursement income. But we have categorically told to our audit officer that all such reimbursement not to be subject to GST if it is not established that these are made towards provision of goods and service other than services by employee to employer in ordinary course of employment. And reimbursement should qualify in the nature of consideration. Though that training has been given to the officer, so there is no fear that all types of this recovery and reimbursement the audit officer will assess as the revenue in GST. That is not. The audit teams has been trained properly that in case of reimbursement, if he treat it as the GST element, in that case, it should be very cautious. And I'm skipping this one. Now, in the last phase, after this examination, the discrepancy will be communicated to you, and in the discrepancy will be very, if there is any legal file, in that case, that reference of the particular case and everything will be supported by the audit team, and you please give your answer within 7 days of the receipt of this observation. And after considering your reply, that will be placed again in the higher officers for his advice, and after that the final audit report will be published. And the consequences, that if you admit properly, your audit will be completed over there. If you admit partly or you are not complying or accepting all the queries, in that case, that will be referred to the adjudicating officer. But my request over is there, whatever you want to convey or want to oppose. So in that case, during this audit stage, please produce all such explanations so that that can be concluded during this audit. So there should not be any repetition of work. That is our request only. And this is the 5 things to remember in the audit in GST, particularly in case of West Bengal. Cooperate with the audit team. They will definitely cooperate with you and produce books of account as asked for, not all the books of accounts. Try to answer with supporting document in course of hearing. Third is that if any findings appears admissible, please make the payment instantly so that your interest burden will not be increased. Submit replies in respect of discrepancies communicated timely. Make voluntary payment if all or some of the audit paras appears acceptable, and definitely it will increase your compliance level in future. Thank you very much for patience hearing, and thankful again to ASSOCHAM and the eminent participants, and also Mr. Pulak Saha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Guria. Thank you very much for giving us the complete idea what is exactly the area where you are actually focusing, and also you have given us an idea that how an SSC is going to be prepared. So and that is in this process what has happened. You have already you have done a lot of my jobs in this today's year. I will take up only 3 slides because I had covered around 11 slides. But since you have covered almost everything, nothing to be repeated. So thank you once again. And in future also, we would expect you to be with us whenever we need you. I know that you would always be ready with us to come forward and help us for giving this kind of deliberations, etc. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So can you give me the BA share here?
Yes. Yes, sir. That presentation.
No, no, no. I'm just talking about now our IT
Okay.
team,
Okay.
so that I can go my presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you so much. So I think that the way Mr. Guria has given us the ideas that about audit, we have been well enlightened about the process and procedures and etc. So I would just take you through 3 slides only, and I will take only 5 minutes. Basically, that when an audit comes, how would you be prepared for that? The first thing what you need to see that when the notice has been received, that whether that notice is received, whether already on that similar notice you have been investigated by the central tax authorities. Because as you all know that GST has been divided between central GST and state GST. Administration has been divided between 2 GST authorities. And we have come across a situation that the Central Investigation Authority has already initiated any proceedings, and the State Investigation Authority again started on the similar proceedings. And recently in the Calcutta High Court, a Raj Metal Industries Limited's case, the Calcutta High Court said that no, it cannot be done. And for that matter, the reference was actually brought to the notice of the High Court, so that there was a circular which has been issued by the CBIC dated 5th October 2018, wherein it is stated that when a central authority has started an investigation, and in that case, that investigation, they are not bound to hand it over to the state authority till it gets concluded. And so parallel proceeding should not be there. Second, that once you receive a notice and you see that whether the notice, the first that notice, whether you got that 15 days, that proper notice has been issued or not, whether the proper authorities are there or not, because as already that it has been told and we have been enlightened that the person who would be visiting and who would be coming to your place for an audit, he would be appropriately authorized, whether he has been authorized or not. Then you find out from the list of documents asked for, you collect all these documents, review it, prepare the reconciliation, because there could be so many situations which Mr. Guria has rightly elaborated, that there are cases where there could be some amount of reconciliation is required with the return and the financial records. That financial record and the return are required to be reconciled and see before you give it to information to the authorities. Then you know that there could be some difference of opinion. There could be some difference of opinion with the authority. That means you have taken a legal position. So whenever you have taken some legal position for taking more credit or not paying tax or taking the benefit of any exemption notification, etc. So what are the bases? What are the legal documents you have? Keep it handy so that you can produce all this at the time of that audit and not at the time of audit or not. So that needs to be very, very for any position which you have taken, and as all of us aware that for any position it is always a litigative proposition. Now, after you prepare everything, then you be sure that anything and everything which would be submitted physically, that physically to be submitted along with a receipt. You always prepare a cover letter Even if you are sending through a mail, the document in a soft form, then you in the cover letter on the cover mail, you write what are you submitting, what are the documents you are submitting. Please always honor the requirement of the departmental officers whenever they call, unless until it is extreme emergency, you are not in a position to visit the office that point of time, ask for a time and you cooperate with them, because as you all are aware that the within 3 months audit is required to be completed. Now, any provisional document which is required, and every time, as it's a process, Mr. Guria told that it's a process, because if you submit first balance sheet, P&L account, etc., audit report, so and so, they will scrutinize. And after scrutiny, they will ask for a couple of further information. So this is a continuous process of flow of information, and every flow of information, what you would be giving to the department to ensure that you have reviewed it, because the first time you are handling this kind of audit, and when this is first, maybe second and third time, you won't be facing the difficulties, and that is why you have to be a little bit careful. And whenever that audit is completed, it has been communicated to you, then you review that whether you agree to the proposition of the department. If you agree, without wasting time, deposit the tax and interest so that the matter can be concluded there. If you do not agree, then take the appropriate legal position, then consult with the lawyer, with the appropriate legal consultant, and take a position before you dispute this matter. Because if you dispute a matter, it has a cost. Because if your legal position is not correct, then the legal, because as we all know that our judiciary system, it takes long time to finish any litigation. So over a period of time, your interest burden would be very high for that matter. So you have to be very, very careful about this issue. Now, there could be, what could be the issues where you have to be very careful. Mr. Guria has already informed us. So I'm just taking through a couple of important things, that input tax credit and utilization, any short reversal. As you know that there are provisions where you have to reverse the credit, and whether you have appropriately reversed the credit or not, whether there is any shortfall or not, all this because you have filed the return, and more particularly, that already you have filed your 9C. And when that 9C was filed, the charter, your GST auditor has already signed. Now, again, you have to see that whether anything missed out that point of time or not. You have to be taken into consideration, all these things. Now that you definitely have the reconciliation done from GST 3B, 289, etc. Then, as already I've told, that turnover and the books of accounts, etc., everything to be reconciled, and also review very, very critically whether any expenditure where you are liable to pay reverse charge liability has not been paid, right? That also review the situation. There are cases, as you all know, that there are cases where the matter is under litigation, that GST liability on the ocean freight, intermediary service, carry forward of sales, these are the highly litigative issues. So when there is a litigation and that matter has not yet been settled so far, so you have to be very, very careful for taking a position in this regard. So that requires a very high level of thought process. Now, incorrect any carried forward of the Tran 1 credit, non-reflection of credit in Tran 1, all these things to be seen into. That for liability, suppose sometimes what happened because of the fund crisis, you could not make the payment on time, that whether the interest, due interest has been paid or not. And there are cases we have seen that, that there are very industry specific issues. So many industry specific issues are there when we handle the cases. So that whether you're in your particular industry where you are actually falling, whether you have any industry specific issue or not, whether any representation has been given to the government or not, and accordingly you have to take the position in this regard. So this is way, and I think that this is the way that how this audits to be handled. And as Mr. Guria rightly pointed out, that never fear about the audit. as we, all the industry stakeholders, we all have the very high level of fear about the audit and etc. from the departmental. He has assured us and he has given us a high level of comfort. And think I from the Chamber of Commerce, from ASSOCHAM, I also request to all our members that you please cooperate, because this is the first year of audit. This is the first year that both the parties have to face the problem, and this problem we mutually have to take care of it, because that is also our responsibility. With this, thank you very much for the patient hearing.
Pulak sir, Kollol here. Actually, Patodia sir is summing up the program.
The council to give a formal vote of thanks to all the participants.
We have now come to the end of this webinar on this very important topic of taxation preparedness. I am thankful to Senior Advocate Mr. J.P. Khaitan for having nicely taken us through all the orders of Honorable Supreme Court of India and given us the finer point that the orders of Supreme Court are basically on the adversarial litigation. It's not that it's a omnibus kind of a order which covers everything which department wants to extend. So that clears a lot of headache, I think, for the SSCs as well as the client who are now bothered with notices under section 148 for assessment year 2013-14 and 14-15 and don't know which law to apply, old law or new law. Everybody is in a circle. So I think Mr. J.P. Khaitan's deliberation, a lot of people will now be able to formulate their strategy, how to strategize their litigation. I am really thankful, sir, to you for having spared your valuable time for this webinar of ASSOCHAM. Thanks once again. Now coming to our guest of honor, Mr. Kali Tanwar, I think couldn't make it because Didi had called him to Navarna as he had pleaded. I think must be very, very urgent. But in his absence, I must say, Mr. Guria betted very well. It is for the first time, I think, we are hearing where the department is coming up that what all they are going to do as a plan of audit. They are explaining that these are the things we are going to look at. These are the things. This is the manner in which you should prepare. And he explained it very beautifully with the help of all the slides which he had prepared. I am really thankful, Mr. Guria, to you for having spared your valuable time. I would only request that if you can share the presentation which you made, unless it is confidential and you cannot share, it will be helpful for all the participants. So thank you once again, Mr. Guria. And above all, Mr. Pulak Saha, ASSOCHAM's chairman, for having conceptualized this entire seminar and the topics, etc. The entire thing at the end, he explained how in the short 3 slides, the entire summing up of the intricacies of the GST audit, which everybody has to face. So thank you, Pulakda, and above all, the entire team at the ASSOCHAM for having organized this wonderful webinar. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Khaitan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.